The sun hung low over the dusty frontier town of Red Bluff, casting long shadows across the silent courtyard where traders and ranchers stood gathered. The air felt heavy, like the land itself knew something wrong was about to happen. A wooden platform had been dragged to the center, and on it stood a young woman named Leora, her hands trembling at her sides as she tried to keep her chin lifted. Her long dress swayed in the hot wind, and though she looked frightened, there was a quiet strength in her eyes that made a few men shift uncomfortably. Whispers ran through the crowd. Whispers of debt, whispers of cruelty, whispers of men who thought they had the right to decide the value of another human soul. The sheriff, a tall man named Carver, kept rubbing the back of his neck, unsure if he even believed what he'd been forced to oversee. Beside him stood the town's wealthy merchant, Brenton Hale, the man who had arranged everything. His voice carried across the courtyard as he barked orders, as if Leora were nothing more than a sack of grain he was trying to sell. Folks knew Leora had been alone ever since her father passed in a fire. Hale claimed she owed him for land, for water, for protection, for things she never asked for. Most people suspected he simply wanted control over her life, but no one dared challenge a man with that much power. The old American frontier was harsh, and power meant everything. A woman without family had no shield, no voice, no chance. The bidders gathered, some out of cruelty, some out of desperation, and some out of simple curiosity. They never expected what came next. They never expected that miles away, deep in the desert wind, an Apache warrior named Kellen felt something in his chest twist as if a storm had passed through his heart. Kellen had known Kalora in a way no one else understood. Their worlds were divided by cultures, by history, by old wounds left by settlers and warriors alike. But hearts do not follow borders. Kellen had met her months earlier when she had wandered injured on the edge of the desert, and he had carried her to safety. She remembered the strength in his arms, the fierce kindness in his eyes, the way he spoke with honor even when words were few. He remembered her softness, her bravery, and the way she looked at him without fear. When she healed, she returned to town, promising someday she would repay him with something bigger than gratitude. Instead, trouble had followed her faster than she could imagine. Kellen heard from a traveler that Leora was in danger, that hell planned to take everything from her. The news hit him like the crack of a rifle. He saddled his horse, a powerful black stallion named Nightfall, and rode like the desert wind was chasing him. He rode with the rage of a man who refused to lose someone he silently loved. Back in Red Bluff, Leora stood tall on the platform while Hale announced the first bid. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears, but she refused to cry. She refused to break. She looked across the crowd, hoping for one kind face, but found none. The world felt large and cruel, and she wondered if this was how her story would end. Sold like an object under a burning sky, the moment Hale lifted his hand to begin. A distant thunder rolled across the open plains. At first people thought it was the weather shifting, but the sky was clear. Then came the sound again, louder this time, sharper, like hooves, striking hard ground with the fury of a storm. Heads turned toward the town gate, and a ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. From beyond the dust clouds a lone rider appeared. Dark braids streamed behind him, feathers swaying as the horse beneath him charged forward. Nightfall reared high as Kellen pulled him back at the edge of the courtyard, his silhouette cutting across the light like a force sent by the land itself. Gasps erupted. Several men stepped back. Carver froze. Hale's face drained of color. Kellen looked only at Lore. She felt her breath catch. It seemed as if the world around her disappeared, like only the two of them existed. His eyes held the same fierce protectiveness she remembered. But now there was something deeper, something that made the crowd uneasy, as if they were witnessing a truth they were never meant to see. Kellen guided Nightfall forward, the stallion kicking up dust with every step. The townsmen muttered nervously, and a few reached for their rifles. Unsure whether they were facing danger or destiny, Hale shouted for Kellen to stop, claiming this was town business, but Kellen's gaze never wavered. He moved as if Hale's voice were nothing but wind. Nightfall reared up, hooves slicing the air, and the crowd stepped back in fear. But Leora stood rooted to the platform, her eyes locked with Kellen's. Trusting him completely, Kellen finally stopped inches in front of her, his horse breathing hard, dust swirling around them like a shield. He spoke her name in a single low breath, and she felt her knees weaken. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a promise. A reminder. A warning to everyone watching that she was not alone. No one dared breathe. When Kellen turned his head slowly toward the men who tried to claim ownership of her life, his voice carried strength even though it was quiet. He said she was not to be touched, not to be claimed, not to be taken. He said she belonged to no man's command, and that anyone who tried to harm her would answer for it. Hale sputtered with anger and fear, accusing Kellen of crossing a line that should never be crossed. But people noticed something unsettling. Hale, a man who feared nothing, seemed shaken by the warrior's presence. Leora saw it too, and for the first time in weeks. She felt a small flame of hope rise inside her chest. The crowd shifted, torn between fear and admiration. Carver stepped forward, trying to keep order, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he knew the situation had already grown bigger than any law he could enforce. Leora whispered Kellen's name, her voice breaking from the weight of everything she had endured. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening just for her. She asked him a question with her eyes, a question she had held in her heart since the day she left his care. "Why did you come for me? What am I to you?" Kellen did not answer, not yet. His silence held truth, but also danger. Some of the ranchers started murmuring about defending the town, while others quietly wondered if perhaps Kellen was right. If maybe Hale had gone too far. Winds swept across the courtyard, stirring dust and tension alike. The sun dipped lower, casting an orange glow over the scene, turning it into something unforgettable. Leora felt the world balance on the edge of something powerful. Kellen was risking everything by being here. And she knew Hale would not back down without a fight. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a rifle was lifted somewhere else. A horse snorted nervously. Somewhere inside Leora's heart, an old fear collided with a new, fierce courage. The moment felt ready to explode. But no one knew which direction the story would take next, because the man who loved her had arrived, but the men who wanted to own her were not done yet, and the town of Red Bluff was about to witness a choice. That could change everything. The courtyard stayed frozen, as if even the wind was afraid to move. Kellen's horse stood tall, its shadow stretching across the ground toward Leora like a shield placed there by the land itself. Hale's men shifted uneasily, looking at one another, wondering who would make the first mistake. Leora could feel her heartbeat racing in her throat, but she kept her eyes on Kellen, finding a kind of courage in the way he sat so steady. So sure of himself, Carver stepped forward with his hand hovering above his holster. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was tired of Hale's demands, tired of holding a town together that was split between fear and pride. He swallowed hard before speaking, telling Kellen to stand down, reminding him this was town soil. But even Carver's voice cracked a little, because he could see the truth. Kellen wasn't here for a fight. He was here to protect someone he refused to lose. Hale didn't see it that way. His pride burned brighter than any sense of reason. He shouted that this was proof the Apache were dangerous, that Kellen had crossed a boundary no warrior should cross. Hale stepped closer to Leora, as if claiming her again. The move made Kellen's gaze sharpen with a warning so strong it made two men step back without thinking. Leora felt that same warning settle deep in her chest. All her life she had known Hale wanted control, but she never understood how far he would go until now. The townspeople avoided meeting her eyes, ashamed of their silence. Even Carver looked away as Kellen watched the sheriff hesitate. Something old resurfaced inside him, memories from seasons before. Memories of being treated as less than a man simply for being who he was. He remembered his father, a respected elder, telling him that the world on the frontier was divided by walls that no builder ever touched. Walls of fear, walls of misunderstanding, walls that kept hearts from knowing each other. Kellen had tried to live by honor, by peace, avoiding the violence that tore his people and the settlers apart. But standing here, seeing Leora forced onto a platform like property, he felt those invisible walls closing in again. Leora sensed his inner battle, even though she didn't know all its history. She only knew that he had risked crossing lands he wasn't welcome in just to stand by her side. She remembered the day she met him, how she had wandered too far into the desert searching for herbs her father once used for medicine. She slipped down a steep hillside and injured her leg. Before fear could take her fully, Kellen had appeared from the canyon shadows, carrying her gently to a sheltered place where the sun softened and the wind cooled. He made a splint for her, brought her water, stayed until she could walk again. In those quiet hours, they learned something about each other that words could never hold. She saw his discipline, his strength, his way of listening with his whole presence. He saw her kindness, her stubborn bravery, and her ability to look at him without judgment or fear. When she left, she promised she would not forget him. She kept that promise. Even though the world tried to bury every good memory beneath hardship, Kellen had also carried that promise in his chest. For months he tried to focus only on his duties, avoiding the thought of a woman he could not safely walk beside in the open. But when he heard she was in danger, something inside him refused to be silent as he sat on his horse now. He noticed someone in the crowd raising a rifle. It was a rancher named Brigson, a man known for his temper. Kellen's jaw tightened. He slowly moved his horse so its body shielded Leora. This simple motion made several people gasp. Leora looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions and gratitude mixed together. Carver raised a hand, telling Brigson to lower his weapon, warning him that shooting would only lead to blood that would stain the town forever. Brigson hesitated, glancing at Hale. Hale's eyes narrowed, urging him silently to take the shot. But Brigson lowered the gun anyway. Even hot-headed men sometimes recognize when they're standing on the edge of a cliff. The tension eased only a breath. But every breath mattered in moments like this. Kellen turned toward Leora again. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her down from the platform, but he knew the crowd had to be handled first. He studied every face, every weapon, every line of fear and hatred. He had been in battles, but this felt different. This was not a fight born of war. This was a fight born of injustice. Leora finally found her voice and asked Kellen how he had known she needed help. His answer was simple. He told her a rider came through the desert, speaking her name. Saying trouble had taken hold in Red Bluff, he didn't wait for details. He rode through the night because something inside him felt wrong, as if a storm had formed in his chest. Hale interrupted with a sneer, calling Kellen a fool for risking his life for a woman who didn't belong to him. Leora flinched at the words. Kellen's gaze snapped to Hale with a fire that made even the bravest men step back. Kellen told him that Leora was not a thing to belong to anyone. She had a spirit stronger than most people Hall claimed to lead. He told Hale that trying to sell her was an insult not only to her, but to every honest soul in the frontier. Those words struck harder than any fist, but Hale only grew more furious. He accused Kellen of wanting power over the town. He twisted the story, painting himself as the victim, insisting that Kellen came to ignite chaos. Some townsfolk wavered, confused, unsure whom to believe. Fear had ruled them for so long that truth felt like a stranger. Leora stepped forward on the platform, her voice shaking but clear. She told them Hale's actions had nothing to do with protection or debt. She said he used her father's death as an excuse to manipulate her life. She reminded them of the time her house roof collapsed in a storm. And Hale offered help only if she worked off a debt she never owed. People remembered that day. Some bowed their heads in guilt. Before she could say more, Hale shouted for silence and ordered his men to seize her. But they didn't move. Hale barked again, but still no one obeyed. The sight of Kellen on that powerful horse, the sight of Leora standing so bravely, had planted doubt inside them. However, doubt is not the same as courage. As the moment stretched thin, a distant drumming sound echoed from beyond the hills. Slow, steady, growing louder. Some men turned pale. Drumming meant riders. Riders meant warriors. And the frontier towns always feared the arrival of Apache riders. Remembering the old conflicts even when peace had tried to settle in, Kellen's eyes narrowed. He recognized the rhythm. It wasn't a war beat. It was a warning call. Someone from his own tribe must have followed him, fearing he was riding into danger. The drumming grew louder, closer, until dust rose behind the hills. Hale took this as the chance he needed. He pointed at Kellen and shouted that the warrior brought reinforcements, that this was an attack, that the town had to defend itself before they were overtaken. Panic shot through the crowd like lightning. Carver tried to calm them, insisting that no one knew the rider's intent. But Hale's voice overpowered his. Fear spread faster than truth. Men lifted rifles. Women backed away. Horses whinnied nervously. Leora felt her pulse quicken. She looked at Kellen, searching for answers, but even he didn't know what his people were planning. He only knew one thing. He had to get her off that platform and away from Hale before chaos swallowed the town. Kellen leaned slightly forward, whispering to Leora that she needed to be ready. She nodded, trusting him without hesitation. The dust behind the hills grew thicker. The drumming faster. Hale raised his arm to give a command. Carver grabbed Hale's wrist to stop him. Kellen tensed, nightfall stamping the ground. Leora steadied her breathing, and the riders finally broke over the ridge. Their silhouettes cut through the setting sun, leaving the entire town wondering whether salvation or danger had just arrived. Nothing was resolved. Everything was about to unravel. The riders thundered down from the ridge, their drums fading into the pounding of hooves on hard earth. Dust wrapped around them like a moving curtain as they descended toward Red Bluff. The townsfolk pulled back from the courtyard, some stumbling into doorways, some dragging their children behind barrels and wagons. A few ranchers stayed near the center, rifles clenched tight, eyes wide with fear. Kellen studied the approaching group. He knew the leader by the way he sat his horse, straight and calm, even on the slope. It was Talon, an older warrior who had watched Kellen grow from boy to man. Talon was respected for his cautious wisdom. If he was here, it meant the council feared trouble enough to send someone they trusted to either bring Kellen home or stand with him. Depending on what he had done, Hale saw the riders and felt something close to panic flicker in his chest. He pushed it down and forced his voice to sound strong. He shouted that the town was under threat and that they would not be taken by surprise. His words were meant to rally the ranchers, but many heard the false courage in his tone. Hall cared more about his pride than the safety of Red Bluff. Carver's mind raced. He had seen raids in his early years, had seen what happened when fear met pride, and no one stepped back. The sheriff raised both hands and yelled for everyone to hold fire. He shouted that no one would shoot unless there was a clear attack. His voice cracked through the tension. Buying a thin slice of silence, the Apache riders slowed as they entered the courtyard. Talon's eyes scanned the scene. He saw Leora on the platform, saw Kellen in front of her, saw rifles glinting in nervous hands. He understood more in a single glance than most men could in an hour. Talon halted his horse a few strides from Kellen. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them held years of shared training and unspoken questions. Finally, Talon called Kellen by a name from childhood, soft but steady, asking what he had done. Kellen answered that he had followed his heart and his sense of justice. He said the woman behind him was being treated like property, sold by a man who twisted law and power. He said he would not stand by while such a wrong happened. Some of the riders shifted uncomfortably. They knew the stories of settlers taking land, taking lives, taking dignity. But they also knew that riding straight into a frontier town could ignite a war they did not want. Talon's jaw tightened. He warned Kellen that one man's heart could not justify bringing danger to an entire tribe. Leora listened, understanding only parts of their exchange, but she could hear the weight inside it. She felt guilt mixed with gratitude. Kellen had risked more than his own life for her. He had risked his people's safety as well. Hale saw hesitation among the riders and moved quickly. He stepped forward, hands raised like a false peacemaker, and announced that if the warriors left now, the town would forget this trespass. He promised there would be no trouble, as long as they left the woman and the town in his hands. Leora's stomach twisted at his words. Hale always spoke like he owned everything under the sky. He did not say her name. He only called her the woman, as if that erased her history, her pain, her dreams. Kellen answered sharply that Hale had no right to claim her. He repeated that she owed no true debt. The argument was no longer just about Leora. It had become a clash between two ways of seeing the world. One way measured worth in coins and control, the other measured worth in honor and heart. Carver stepped between them, trying to speak as the law of the frontier town. He said the auction was wrong, that he had never felt right about it. He admitted he had been too afraid to stand against Hale alone. The sheriff's voice shook when he said it, but the truth still landed with force. Some townsfolk avoided his eyes, knowing they had also stayed quiet. Hale turned on Carver, calling him weak, claiming that without his wealth the town would starve. He reminded them of wagons he had funded, of cattle he had bought, of hired hands he had paid. He painted himself as the spine of Red Bluff, the man who made everything possible. His words stirred some of the ranchers who owed him money, men who were afraid of losing their land if they did not stand behind him. In the crowd stood a young stable hand named Elier, who had once borrowed money from Hale to buy a sick mare he wanted to save. Hale had doubled the interest without warning, keeping the boy in debt for months. Elier watched the scene unfolding and felt something break loose inside him. He stepped forward and shouted that Hale's generosity always came with chains. He told everyone how Hale changed agreements and threatened to take the mare anytime Elier fell behind on payments. The courtyard shifted. More stories rose in quiet murmurs. A shopkeeper whispered about unfair rent. A widowed rancher recalled being forced to sell her best grazing land for far less than it was worth. Piece by piece, Hale's image cracked. Hale's eyes burned with rage. But he still held one powerful weapon: fear. He reminded them that others could come to claim what he had built. He implied that without his hold on the town, outlaws or rival traders would rush in and take everything. While the argument thickened, Talon studied the townsfolk carefully. He saw fear, but also shame. He saw a woman on a platform who should never have been there. He looked at Kellen again and realized this was not just a love story in the Wild West. This was a test of what kind of men they would be remembered as. Talon asked Leora a simple question. Did she choose to stand with Kellen, or did she want to remain under Hale's protection? The question made the air even heavier. Leora felt every eye on her. Her throat tightened. She thought of her father, who had always told her that a person's worth was not set by another's voice. She thought of the nights she lay awake, fearing what would happen if Hale finally decided she owed him her freedom. She looked at Kellen and then at Talon. She said clearly that she did not want Hale's protection. She said the only protection she wanted was the freedom to choose her own path, and that Kellen was the only one who had ever risked himself for her. Without asking for anything in return, those words sealed something. They tied her fate to Kellen more firmly than any rope ever could. Hale understood this and realized he was losing control. He stepped back, signaling quietly to Brigson and another rancher named Danton. The signal was quick, a small tilt of his head, but Kellen's sharp eyes caught it. Hale wanted them to circle around, to flank the riders from behind. At the same time, inside the group of Apache, one younger warrior named Soren grew nervous. He had lost family years earlier during a clash near another town. He did not trust settlers at all. He whispered to another rider that this could be a trap, that the sheriff and ranchers might wait for an excuse to shoot. Soren's hand hovered near his bowstring, his body coiled like a spring. Talon saw tension rising on both sides. He warned Kellen quietly that one mistake would light a fire neither side could control. He suggested they take Leora and discuss options away from the town. But Kellen knew Hale would never simply let her leave. Hale needed proof of his power. Letting her go would make him look weak. Kellen shook his head and said the truth had to be witnessed where the wrong was done. If they snuck her out, Hale would twist the story and turn Red Bluff against all Apache people, calling them thieves. Kellen believed that if justice happened here in the open, the story could not be twisted so easily. Talon was not sure, but he heard the conviction in Kellen's voice. Meanwhile, Carver pulled Leora aside as far as the platform chains allowed. He told her he had once promised her father he would look out for her. That promise had been heavy on his heart since the fire. He admitted that fear of losing his badge and the town's support had kept him quiet. Leora's eyes filled, not with soft forgiveness yet, but with the pain of knowing how long she had stood alone. Carver said he was done being silent. He walked back before the crowd, removed his badge, and held it in his hand. He declared that law meant nothing if it served only the powerful. If defending Leora and preventing injustice meant losing his title, then so be it. His voice shook, but he did not back down. Some people straightened at this. Others looked at Hale with growing unease. The balance in Red Bluff shifted one more fragile inch. Hale realized he could not let this continue. The more people spoke, the weaker his grip grew. With a hard smile, he suggested a simple solution. He said if Kellen wanted Leora so badly, he could pay for her like any other man at the auction. Hale set a price so high no normal rancher could meet it. He argued that this would honor both sides. The town would get money, the warrior would get the woman, and no blood would spill. Leora felt sick at the way he framed it. Turning love and sacrifice into a trade made her feel small again. She looked at Kellen, expecting him to reject the idea fully. He did reject the idea of buying her, but he also saw an opening. If he could twist Hale's offer back on him, perhaps he could expose the greed in front of everyone. Kellen told Hale he would agree to a different kind of exchange. He would not buy Leora like property, but he would stake something of his own and demand that Hale do the same. If Kellen could prove that Hale's claims about her debt were false, Hale would release her and repay every coin he had stolen from the town. If Kellen failed, he would leave and never return, and his people would keep their distance from Red Bluff forever. The riders behind Kellen murmured in alarm. Talon warned him he was risking more than himself. He was risking their right to move freely through the valley. Yet Kellen's eyes stayed fixed on Hale. Hale paused. He liked wagers. He trusted his own lies and the forged papers he kept locked away. He agreed, but only if the proof would be settled quickly. He said they would go to his office, bring out the records, and show everyone the truth of Leora's debt. As they spoke, Brigson and Danton continued to circle along the edges of the buildings, trying not to draw attention. Among the riders, Soren whispered that this talk of records was a trick meant to distract them while someone lined up a shot. He nudged his horse closer to Leora's side, vowing silently that if any man raised a weapon against her or Kellen, he would answer with an arrow. The sky darkened a little as clouds drifted in from the distant mountains. Shadows stretched across the courtyard. Folks felt the temperature drop just enough to notice. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Kellen dismounted at last, handing Nightfall's reins to Elier, who took them with a mixture of fear and pride. The Apache warrior stood on the ground now, eye to eye with Hal. Leora watched him closely, feeling both dread and a strange, unshakable hope. Talon ordered half of the riders to stay near the horses and half to follow at a careful distance. He wanted no surprises inside tight walls. Carver, still holding his badge in his fist, announced that if they went to see Hale's records, he would be there as witness. Badge or no badge, they began to move toward Hale's office at the edge of the courtyard, each step echoing the weight of what was at stake. Behind them, unseen by most, Brigson lifted his rifle toward Kellen's back, and on the opposite side, Soren silently pulled an arrow from his quiver, eyes locked on the rancher, ready to choose in a heartbeat whether he would start a war or stop one. Kellen walked beside Leora as the group moved toward Hale's office, every step tightening the air around them like a rope pulled too far. The townsfolk followed at a careful distance, whispers rolling through the crowd in waves. Some were curious, some afraid, and some quietly hopeful that the truth would finally be forced into the open. The Apache riders held their positions, their horses steady but alert, watching every roof and doorway. And behind all of them, danger moved with silent feet. Carried in the hands of Brigson and the rigid posture of Soren, Kellen sensed the tension shifting behind him. The way the ground seemed to hum beneath his boots. Years of tracking, of living close to the land, taught him how to hear danger, even when no sound gave it away. He did not turn, not yet. Turning too soon might start something he could not stop. Instead, he spoke softly to Leora, asking if she was steady enough to walk. She nodded, even though her knees felt weak. Her fear was real, but her trust in him was stronger. The entrance to Hale's office stood at the far end of the courtyard, a tall wooden door framed by adobe walls that trapped heat like a furnace. Hale walked ahead of them with false confidence, though sweat gathered at his collar. He knew the moment those papers came out, everything could fall apart if even one person doubted him. He needed control, and control was slipping through his fingers faster than he could tighten his grip. Carver stayed close behind Hale, his sheriff's badge still in his hand. The badge felt heavier than steel now, a reminder of promises broken, and promises he still hoped to keep. He watched Hale carefully, ready for any trick. Though he couldn't deny that part of him feared Hale might still find a way to twist truth into chains. As they passed the well in the center of the courtyard, Leora noticed several people she knew. Old Mara, who once shared soup with her after her father's death. The Miller brothers, who had always looked at Hale with fear more than respect. Even little Jessa, who peeked from behind her mother's skirt. Their eyes carried something new. Not pity, not judgment. Something closer to awakening. They finally saw what had been done to her, and what Kellen was risking to undo it. Kellen kept walking, but shifted subtly, placing himself more between Leora and the crowd. His senses sharpened. He could feel Briggson's intent like a cold weight behind him. Soren's bowstring drew tighter with every step. The air between those two men felt like a wire stretched across the desert floor, ready to snap with one footstep or one breath. Inside Hale's office, the air was stifling. Dust-covered shelves filled with ledgers, old contracts, land maps, and locked metal boxes. Hale moved quickly to one of the drawers, pulling out a thick stack of papers. Kellen entered second, scanning every corner, every shadow, every possible escape. 3 Apache riders followed just inside the doorway, Talon at the front. His posture still calm, but ready. Carver ordered Hale to place the papers on the table where everyone could see. Hale hesitated, then set them down with a heavy thump. The room filled slowly with townsfolk pushing in from the courtyard, eager to see the truth. Leora stood behind Kellen, her hands clenched together, her breath unsteady. She felt every eye on her, waiting to see if Hale's words would hold or fall apart. Hale flipped open a ledger and pointed to a page marked with Leora's name. He claimed this was the proof of her debt. But Kellen stepped closer, lifting the ledger with deliberate calm. He studied the page, then turned to another section, then another. His brow furrowed slightly. Something was wrong. The ink on the page had faded unevenly. The handwriting shifted in places. The date did not match the year Leora's father died. Talon leaned in, noticing it too. The elders of his people kept written agreements with settlers, so he knew what real records looked like. He murmured that these pages had been altered. Carver took the ledger next and ran his finger across the ink. He had seen enough forged documents in his years as sheriff to know the signs. His face hardened with each passing second. Hale laughed, but the sound was brittle. He insisted the ledger was old and age made writing fade. He accused Kellen of trying to twist honest accounts. But his voice cracked when Carver announced that he recognized the handwriting. And it was not the handwriting of Leora's father, nor any witness he knew, before Carver could say more. A sudden movement outside the doorway snapped Kellen's attention. He turned just enough to see Brigson slipping past the crowd, his rifle angled low, but aimed with deadly purpose. Kellen's muscles tensed. He stepped slightly in front of Leora, shifting her behind him without making it obvious. Soren saw it too. His fingers tightened around the arrow, ready to release. Talon caught the shift and whispered for Soren to hold. But Soren's jaw clenched. He had lost too much in the past to trust the restraint of settlers. If that rifle lifted even an inch higher, he would strike. The room grew heavier as Carver held up the ledger for everyone to see. He spoke loudly, telling the crowd about the mismatched ink, the odd numbers, the false dates. Gasps spread through the people. The Miller brothers exchanged looks. Old Mara shook her head with a sorrow that felt centuries old. Leora's legs nearly buckled. For the first time since her father died, she saw a path where truth could stand without fear. But Hale wasn't ready to surrender. He lunged toward the table, grabbing the ledger as if tearing it away would erase what they had just seen. Carver moved to stop him. They struggled, the book tumbling to the floor in that frantic movement. Hale shoved Carver aside, sending him crashing into a shelf. Papers fluttered everywhere. The noise startled Brigson, who jerked his rifle upward, finger tightening. Kellen moved instantly, pulling Leora down and shielding her with his body. Talon yelled for the riders to hold their ground. Soren's arrow rose just as Brigson steadied his aim. Outside, the Apache horses kicked anxiously. Inside, people scrambled, ducking for cover, knocking into tables and chairs. Leora clung to Kellen's arm, terrified, but not for herself. She feared what this moment would bring for him. Carver struggled to his feet and shouted for Brigson to stand down. But Brigson's eyes burned with Hale's rage. He claimed the Apache had come to steal the town, that Kellen wanted control. He shouted that if they didn't fight now, everything would be lost. Kellen rose halfway, keeping Leora behind him. His voice was calm but sharp as he warned Brigson that lifting that rifle again would bring consequences neither side could escape. But Brigson was shaking with anger, more desperate than brave. Before he could fire, something unexpected happened. A child cried out. Little Jessa had slipped inside the office during the commotion and ducked behind her mother when she saw the rifle. Brigson froze. The sight of a frightened child broke through the haze of anger just long enough for hesitation. Soren saw the hesitation too. His arrow softened slightly, though he didn't lower it fully. Talon murmured again to hold, voice steady like a drum calming a storm. Hale realized the rifle angle was slipping out of his control. He knew he had to regain momentum or lose everything. He shouted that Kellen had threatened him, that the Apache planned to attack. He demanded the townsfolk choose between order and chaos. But now the townsfolk weren't listening to him the same way. They had seen too much. They had heard Leora's truth and Hale's lies. More importantly, they had seen Kellen protect her without a blade drawn. They had seen Brigson, one of Hale's closest allies, ready to shoot even when a child stood inches away. Carver stepped to the center of the room, voice stronger than before. He declared that no one would leave the office until the truth was settled. He ordered Brigson to put down his rifle, and slowly, after what felt like an age, Brigson lowered the barrel, though his jaw remained tight with resentment. The tension did not vanish. It only changed shape, shifting into something sharper and more dangerous. Kellen knew the momentary pause was just that, a pause. The deeper conflict had not ended. Hall still had power. The forged papers were exposed, but he wasn't finished. A cornered man was often more dangerous than one standing tall. Hale stepped backward toward the inner room of his office, slipping away from the center as if retrieving more records, but Kellen caught the flicker in his eyes. He saw Hale's hand reach toward the drawer where a hidden revolver was. Rumored to be kept, Carver called out a warning. Talon moved toward the doorway to block any retreat. Soren tensed with arrow. Ready, Leora's breath caught, and Hale's fingers closed around the drawer. Handle. Everyone's next move would decide whether the sun set on, justice or blood, and the climax of everything they had. Fought for stood one breath away. Kellen saw Hale's fingers closing around the drawer. Handle and moved before anyone else could breathe. He stepped forward, steady but fast, placing himself between Hale and everyone gathered. Leora gasped softly, reaching out as if she could pull him back, but Kellen didn't stop. He knew that if Hale drew that hidden revolver, the entire room would erupt into chaos. The fragile balance between the townsfolk and the Apache riders would snap, and nothing would end without heartbreak. Hale yanked the drawer open, but before he could reach inside, Carver grabbed his arm with both hands, pulling him away from the desk. Hale fought back with surprising force, fueled by pride and desperation. Papers flew from the drawer as they struggled, the revolver clattering to the floor. The quick sound echoed like a thunderbolt. Everyone stiffened. Talon pushed forward, placing himself protectively near Kellen. Soren stepped even closer, arrow half lifted, but Kellen raised his hand. Signaling him to stop, Carver wrestled Hale back, holding him against the wall. Hale tried to shout, but Carver's voice drowned him out. He declared loudly that Hale had tried to arm himself against unarmed people, that he had forged records, and that he had tried to sell a woman he had no right to command. The truth filled the small office like a storm, tearing through dry brush. The townsfolk stared at Hale with a mixture of shock and shame. For years, they had let him lead them, let him decide everything, let him twist fear into obedience. But in that moment, they saw not a leader, but a man clinging to power he should never have had. Leora stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She said she never owed Hale anything, and now that everyone had seen the forged ledger, she was done living under his shadow. She deserved her own freedom. She deserved her own voice. Kellen watched her with quiet pride, knowing this moment belonged to her, not him. Hale shouted that none of this mattered. He claimed the Apache would take over the town if they weren't stopped. But the Miller brothers stepped forward, shaking their heads. They said it was Hale who had caused division, Hale who had led them with lies and threats. Old Mara stepped behind Leora, placing a hand on her shoulder, as if reminding her she wasn't alone in the town anymore. Carver took the revolver from the floor and handed it to one of the riders behind him, making it clear Hale would not touch a weapon again until justice had been done. He told Hale he was under arrest for fraud and attempted harm. Hale tried to resist, but no one in the room moved to help him anymore. Even Brigson, who earlier aimed at Kellen, looked away, his rifle now resting uselessly against the wall. For the first time, Hale realized he stood alone. Carver led him out of the office into the open courtyard where everyone still watched. The crowd parted as Hale was pushed forward, and the silence carried a weight that no courtroom could match. People who once feared him now saw him clearly. And Leora stood at the doorway, Kellen by her side, watching as the man who tried to control her world lost every ounce of power he claimed. The Apache riders gathered closer, but stayed peaceful, showing they had never come for war. Talon stepped forward and spoke to the townsfolk, saying they had no desire for conflict and had only ridden down from the ridge to protect their own warrior from danger. His voice carried calm strength, and some of the townsfolk nodded in respect. Carver announced that Hale would be taken to the small, holding cabin at the edge of the town until a proper decision was made. Several ranchers agreed to help guard him, men who once followed him blindly, but now understood the damage he had done, with Hale removed. The tension that held the courtyard tight finally began to loosen. People breathed again. Some spoke quietly, some cried a little, and others simply stood in place, absorbing what they had witnessed. Laura stepped down from the platform where she had been humiliated hours earlier. Her legs shook, but when Kellen offered his hand, she took it. The moment their hands touched, the last bit of fear inside her eased. She felt safe. She felt seen. Most of all, she felt free. Kellen asked softly if she was hurt. She shook her head, though her eyes glistened. She told him she was only overwhelmed, not from fear anymore, but from the weight lifting from her life. She thanked him, not only for coming to protect her, but for believing she deserved her own voice. Kellen looked at her, the way he had looked at her that day in the desert when he first carried her to safety. He said she never needed him to give her strength. She already had it. He simply stood where she needed someone to stand. Talon approached them both, saying the council would accept Kellen's action since the truth was now clear. The conflict had been avoided, and peace could hold. Soren lowered his bow at last, though he still glared at Brigson for a moment before slipping the arrow back into his quiver. Carver walked up to them, holding his badge again. He told Leora he was sorry for not standing up sooner. He said he wanted to earn back her trust, not with words, but with better choices. She nodded gently, accepting his apology. She had always respected Carver before Hale's influence grew too strong. Now she saw the sheriff she once believed in returning. Some of the townsfolk came to Leora, offering small words of comfort or regret. Old Mara hugged her lightly, saying she wished she had spoken up earlier, but she would stand with her now. Elia brought nightfall to Kellen, smiling shyly as he handed over the reins. The sun dipped toward the horizon. painting the sky with warm streaks of red and gold. The courtyard glowed, as if the town itself wanted to wash away the old shadows. Kellen turned toward Leora, asking what she wanted to do now that she was free. Her breath caught at the simple question. No one had asked her that in a long time. She said she didn't know yet, but she wanted to start by choosing her own direction. She wanted to rebuild her father's small home, grow her own garden, and live without Hale's shadow. And if the path led beyond Red Bluff, she wanted to walk it without fear. Kellen nodded slowly. He told her she could come to his people if she ever wished to learn their ways or find peace near the river cliffs where the desert winds. A turned soft. He said she would be welcome. Truly welcome. Leora's eyes softened. She asked him gently if he planned to leave right away. For a moment, he didn't answer, looking instead at the mountains that shaped the horizon. Then he turned back to her and said he would stay as long as she wished him to stay. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. She told him she wanted him to stay, not because she needed protection, but because she felt her heart finally finding a place where it could rest. Kellen placed his hand over hers, and the courtyard fell quiet as those nearby watched the moment many had seen forming long before they admitted it. There was no rush, no dramatic claim, just a quiet understanding that something strong had taken root between them. Carver approached again and offered a final piece of closure. He promised that new leadership would be chosen in the town, leadership guided by fairness, not fear. He vowed to rebuild Red Bluff into a place where no person could be sold, threatened, or silenced again. And he asked Kellen and Talon if the town could begin a new friendship with the Apache people who lived in the valley. Talon nodded, saying the first step had already been taken today. Nightfall snorted softly as the evening breeze grew cooler. Kellen helped Leora step down into the dust, and together they walked away from the platform that once held her captive. Now, it only stood as a reminder of what she had overcome. Behind them, people began to clean the courtyard. Others gathered to talk about the future. But Kellen and Leora walked toward the edge of town where the sun painted the sky with its final glow. They stopped near the well, the place where so many had once looked away from her. But today they looked with respect. Leora touched the rough stones of the well, said this was the first time in years the town felt like it belonged to her again. Kellen stood close, offering quiet strength without taking her moment from her. She told him that, even though her future was uncertain, she knew one thing. She wanted to build a life not built on fear but on trust, on love, and on choosing her own path. She looked up at Kellen with a soft, honest smile. He returned it with a warmth that reached all the way into the deepest corners of his heart. As the last bit of sunlight dipped behind the mountains, Leora took Kellen's hand, and together they stepped forward, leaving behind a day filled with anger and danger. Stepping instead into a future shaped by truth, courage, and the love that rode in on horseback to save her, the old American frontier softened around them, carrying a promise that sometimes the strongest battles end not with weapons, but with hearts brave enough to stand for what is right.